Hello, welcome to episode 4 of the Female Male Perspective. I'm here with my co-host, Eddie Cunningham, and I'm Tina Valiant, and we are excited to present to you today parenting after divorce. And this is a huge topic for men and women out there because none of us really know what to do. So
there is so many different parts of this that we can talk about because there's, for me being a guy, I'll be real, our laws are very one-sided towards women. So after my first marriage, even though she was into drugs and she was very abusive, it was nearly impossible. It took me 2.5 years to win custody of my boys. And that's a whole nother episode in that. So there's that topic. There's how do you co-parent when you still don't get along? And then there's how do you co-parent when you do get along, but then there's distance. And then there's how do you co-parent with the new step? How do you, when your spouse remarries, because let's be real, if they remarry, you should be, if you're a healthy person, you should be hoping that they marry someone healthy who's going to be also a good parent and co-parent with you as well.
absolutely, I agree with that. So in a future episode, we are definitely going to talk about how to have children in a blended relationship, because that's a big topic out there. That's like a whole hour in and of itself, right? Because there's a lot of different things in play with that. So for the purpose of today, let's focus on how do you parent your children like right after a divorce? How do you move into shared custody? Because today, in today's day and age, we live in a shared custody era where literally pretty much most parents out there, unless there's extenuating circumstances, are 50-50 parenting. And how do we make that comfortable for the kids? How do we make that comfortable for ourselves? And how do we not overcompensate for the guilt that we have as parents because our kids are now in a broken family? So what topic would you like to start with?
Oh man. Well, let's talk about spoiling the kids to make up for our own insecurities. And yes, I said that right. So I always go back to the 4 agreements and not taking anything personally. Okay, so one of the worst mistakes I think we make as parents, and I think we make it with good intents and good hearts, is we think our job is to keep our kids from hurting. And we think our job, in order to accomplish that, is to give them as much good stuff as we possibly can. So when we feel like when our kids hurt, a lot of us feel, because of that negative belief, that we are failing as a parent and we don't want to. So we start to overcompensate the other way. The truth is, a healthy parenting is not about keeping your kids from experiencing bad things. We don't want that to happen, but it's to actually teach them how to have the right strength and frame of mind to deal with being let down, to deal with not getting their way, to deal with their dream of how a life should be not turning out right, and being able to process it in a healthy way. But we spend way too much time compensating instead of actually teaching and mentoring our kids to get through it. And a lot of that comes from that guilt of, I'm already dealing with all this. I've let my kids down. I wanted to be able to stay with the same person for forever. And now I'm going to make up for it by not saying no and saying yes every chance I get.
And I find that a lot. I mean, a lot of my friends over the years have been divorced, had children. I've been divorced, have children. And it's interesting because a lot of my friends took the stand of, well, because of the situation, I'm letting them kind of do whatever they want. I mean, they don't say that specifically, but it's like, well, I bought them that because they deserve it. I did this because they deserve it. And really what we're creating in that atmosphere is children with entitled behaviors where they believe that the world owes them because of their current circumstances.
Yes,
I took a little bit of a different approach.
They think when something goes bad, I deserve to go out and spoil myself this way. And so you see this in these kids that are in their early 20s going out and they have a bad life. So they go out and buy a $40,000 car that they really can't afford the monthly payments on because they want to feel good and spoil themselves on.
Right. And they're entitled to that. The world owes them. And I find that such an interesting thought process that we create in our children, just like what you say, where, even as parents, we're creating agreements in our children. That is a really strong agreement that we are creating in our children because of our divorce, because things happen. Instead of sitting down with our children and saying to them, you know, I'm sorry that this didn't work out, and I really wanted to be with your father or your mother forever, and unfortunately, that wasn't what was going to happen. We both still love you. We both are active in your life. We're going to figure out this whole co-parenting thing. But the reality is life just happens sometimes, and we have to figure out the best way to get through it together. Instead, people are just like, well, I'm going to give you whatever you want, and I'm going to bail you out whenever you get into trouble. And there's no consequences to your actions, which drives me crazy. Drives
Yeah,
me crazy that there's no consequences to kids' actions anymore.
no. And you ask my kids, one of the most annoying things I would say to them over and over and over again is, well, that was an interesting choice. Even when it was to them getting angry at me, I'd be like,
Mhm.
well, you know, it was an interesting choice. But I told my kids growing up, I told them, I said, look, it's going to be a blessing and a curse the way that we raise you, because one, a blessing because you're going to actually find yourself interviewing for jobs better. People are going to want to hire you. They're going to want to promote you. You're going to think like a business owner rather than just an employee. I said, but the curse of it is going to be the rest of your generation is going to be jealous of what you have and feel entitled to it. And they're going to try and take it from you through legislation. A whole nother topic. But I always told my kids this also, is I said, look, legally, I am only obligated to give you food, water, and shelter. That's it. Everything else is gravy and you have to earn it. I said, now, if that's a peanut butter sandwich, water from the garden hose, and a tent in the backyard, and that's all you're earning, that's all I'm giving you. And they joke about it now, but each of my kids took turns sleeping in the garage. One of my sons had to live in a tent for a while out back. I provided for him. And I know some people are like, oh my gosh, that's so abusive. Well, if you actually think that, then you might want to reevaluate how you are as a parent. And I'm just going to call you out on that, because my job as a parent, my belief that my job as a parent is to prepare my kids to become adults. And the way we do that is by teaching them to be responsible for their own decisions and the consequences of those decisions, not making them responsible for our poor decisions and who we married.
Right.
Which
I agree with that.
we actually teach our kids when we start saying, oh, the marriage fell apart, it's my turn to spoil you now because, you know, you're part of my marriage, and the kids aren't.
Right.
When my ex and I separated, that was the one thing that we tried to talk to the kids about, is like, kids, this is between mom and I. It is our marriage. It's our relationship. It has nothing to do with you whatsoever. We both still love you. We are just working on us, and the breaking up of us has nothing to do with you. You don't need to choose sides. You don't need to be in the middle of it. You're not going to fix us, and you're not going to break us. You guys have your own lives. You still have a mom. You still have a dad, and whatnot. But also, the things you choose to take on is not our responsibility either. If you want to feel hurt about this and upset about this, it's not my job to fix that, because it, again, has nothing to do with you. If you choose to make it about you, well, that's on you. I'm not here to spoil you and make you feel better because you choose to feel bad about this.
Right. How old were your kids when you got divorced?
Older. So I really only had two still out of the five still in the house, and they were in high school.
Okay.
So, and that's a lot easier. I'll be real with you. That was a lot easier to be able to sit down and talk to them, because you have adult children and almost adult children really to sit down and discuss these things with. And a lot of it had to do with how we had parented them already. We were used to having family meetings. We were used to having open communication with our kids. Not that everything went flawless, but we were used to already having that.
Right. My kids were young when I divorced their father. They were, I believe, 5 and 7. And of course, it was about a year and a half after my hospital and like my whole hospital stay that we talked about in the last episode. And they were very young. Now, my youngest daughter was absolutely devastated. I mean,
How old was
the
she?
look, she was 5.
Oh,
And she didn't smile again for a long time. I mean, it was horrible to watch. I had a lot of guilt over that, because she was a daddy's girl through and through, but she liked the family together. I think still to this day, if you'd ask her, what would it be better for you if daddy and I were together? She would say yes, even still to this day. And she's 21 now. At first, I was definitely more of the mom that, took them to the Bahamas and took them to the beach all the time and bought them a lot of clothes and things. Number one, because for the first time in my life, I could spend money however I wanted and I wasn't giving all of my money away, and I had a credit card and I had a debit card, and I was able to do all of those things, which I wasn't allowed to do in the marriage. But also it was because I felt guilty that I couldn't figure out how to make it work. And then I came to the point where I realized my job as their mom was to teach them how to be contributing adults, to teach them what real life was like, to prepare them for what they were going to encounter in the world. And my job was to teach them how to make choices for themselves, not me telling them what to do all the time, because that's the real world. Also, my job was not to bail them out when they got into trouble. My job was to teach them a lesson from that. Right. And find out what they learned from that, because there is consequences to all of our choices in life. So what I started doing at about, I'd say 8, 9-ish for my older one, and so my younger one is 22 months younger than her, I started teaching them consequences versus rewards. And that has been a concept that we still talk about to this day at 21 and 23. And that is, every choice you make in life has a potential consequence and a potential reward. It is up to you if the potential consequence is worth the potential reward. But understand, if you don't tell me about it, it's going to be far worse on the consequence side, because I will find out.
Sure.
Because that's the real world. And I'll never forget, there was a time in their life where I think for the first time ever, they had gotten some bad grades, or they were fighting, or something crazy. I can't even remember why this occurred. But I'm like, okay, your job is school. You don't get physically paid yet, but you will. But your job every day is school, just like mommy has a job to pay for everything that you find so comfortable. So if you are not going to do your job, which is school, the way that you should, there is going to be a consequence. And that consequence is that I am going to show you how the real world works. So tomorrow, go ahead.
I have a great story about this. And I'm going to call my son Sam out on this, because he said he's just as stubborn as his old man. He was struggling with taking care of the things that he had, picking up his toys, doing his laundry. He was probably about 10 years old. And, as the kids, we started teaching them at 6 to do their own laundry, but really it was just helping us separate. And then they would walk with us to the laundry room and whatnot. But they each had their own assigned day for doing laundry. And so I told him, I said, look, you don't have to do laundry. You can choose not to. You don't have to pick up your toys. You can choose not to. However, the consequence of that is you will lose them. Anything you can't take care of, you will lose. That's the way life works. That's the way it's going to work here. I said, so if you leave for school and I walk into your bedroom and there's toys all over the floor, every toy on the floor goes into a box in the garage. If I come in on the day after your laundry and you have dirty clothes in your dirty clothes hamper, all of that's going into a box in the garage. And he fought me on this. And over about 4 months, I'm not joking. I know some people are going to judge me on this, but I don't care. Because
I did the same thing, so I'm not judging.
Great. Sam ended up with a box, not even a dresser, because I caught him breaking his dresser. He was climbing on it and he was breaking. So you can't take care of it. Dresser's gone. He ended up with a box that had like 3 pairs of clothes in it and 1 pair of church clothes, only 2 pairs of shoes, and only a mattress with a sheet and a blanket on it, because he was trashing his sheets as well. And that's it. That's all he had in his room. But it was 4 months. Every time I found him leaving his toys out. And then eventually it got to the point where he went, okay, this sucks. And he took care of his stuff. And at the end of the first week, where he did his laundry just fine. He made his bed every morning. He cleaned up his toys. We went out to the garage and he was able to get some more toys and get some more. It took him 6 months to earn everything back. And it was a 10-month process. And I know there's parents out there that are cringing going, oh my gosh, like that's a lot of work. Yes, but the kids are worth it.
That's your job as a parent, to
Yes.
teach them how the real world works.
But I hear a lot of people say it's just easier if I clean it up. Sure, it's easier on you, but it's more work for them in the long run, because if you don't teach your kids how to be adults, life is going to teach them. And it's going to be a hell of a lot more painful if life teaches them than if you just teach them something simple like that. Sam, after that, was pretty good. There was a couple times that I went, Sam, do you want to start losing? No, I don't want to start losing these things. And he laughs about it now. He actually just got married this weekend. And
yes, I saw the pictures.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Absolutely. He's found his soulmate. I absolutely love having her in the family. But he laughs and jokes about that now. But it left a lasting impression, and it's made him really into more of an adult. And we did similar things like that with each of the kids.
Well, my kids do not laugh about the experience from what I was just going to share with you. And that is that when I told them school is school and that's your job, the next day I'm like, okay, so tomorrow you're going to experience what the real world is like. You're going to have an 8-hour workday. And here's your list of things that you're going to have to do around the house, which includes pulling out the washer and dryer and cleaning the floors underneath, which includes cleaning the patio with brushes, everything you can imagine. Now, here's the deal. You're going to start at this time. You're going to get a 15-minute break midway through. You're going to have lunch, and then you're going to have a 15-minute break at the end. At the end of the day, as your manager, I'm going to inspect your work. And if it's not up to par, you're going to do the same thing again the next day. And you're going to do it over and over and again until you do it right. So I suggest you do it right tomorrow. So the next day, I got up as their boss, started the clock, made them clock in. And all day long, they had to do their jobs. And then at the end, I came in and inspected them, and they were nervous. They were scared. They were like, Mommy, is it good? I'm like, this could be a little bit better. They're like, okay, we'll do it right now. Right now, we'll do it right now. How does it need to be better? Just
overtime, sweet.
Right? And so at the end, they were totally exhausted. And I sat down with them and I said, okay, is it easier right now in your life for you to do your schoolwork and do it well? Or do you want to live the life that you live today for the rest of your life? They're like, we'll do our schoolwork. Never again did I ever have to ask them about homework. Never did I ever have to ask them about anything, because they knew there was going to be a consequence to their choice. Now, fast forward a couple years later, my oldest daughter has all of her guy friends lined up on the couch when I walk in the door. And she's explaining consequences versus rewards.
I thought you were going to say she had them working for 8 hours the next day.
No, she was like, this is how life works. It's all about consequences versus rewards, and everything you choose has a consequence, a potential consequence, and a potential reward. And you have to make the decision whether the potential reward is worth the potential consequence, because either of them can happen at any time. And she's like preaching to these kids. Okay. So then about 2 months later, this is my oldest daughter. She's the really feisty one. And she comes to me and she's like, okay, Mom, yesterday I made a choice and I outweighed the consequences versus the rewards. And I decided that the potential reward was worth the potential consequence. So this is what I did. Give me my consequence. I just sat there and
What'd you do?
I'm trying not to laugh inside, like, wow, okay, like I don't even know that I can give you a consequence at this point, because that was so mature, right? For this 14-year-old standing in front of me. And I'm like, okay, what do you think your consequence should be? And she's like, well, I think it should be this, this, and this. And I'm like, okay. Now, mind you, she had given herself far worse of a consequence than I ever would have given her.
Yeah.
And she accepted it. She walked away. No argument, no anything. Like, I made a choice. It was worth it. I had fun. And I'm willing to take the consequence for that.
Yeah, moments like that it pays it back, all the work that you did. I actually had my grandson. Yes, I have a grandson.
Really?
I was 17 when I started having kids. So
okay.
I'm a young dad and now a young grandpa.
Okay.
And I remember he got in trouble and I put him in bed. And after about 5 minutes, I went in there to check on him. And cutest thing ever, because my kids were teaching their kids now the same thing about consequences. And he looks up at me, he calls me Papos. And he goes, Papos, I don't like bad consequences. I only like good consequences. So he goes, I'm taking the bad consequences out of your heart and only putting good consequences in your heart. Sweetest thing ever.
Aww.
But he was grasping it. He was grasping that when you make decisions, there are consequences, both good and bad. Which ones do you want to earn?
Sure.
It was just powerful. Only 5 years old when he was getting that. But yeah, those moments are precious. That makes you go, okay, all the exhausting work that I did is worth it. Absolutely
I'm
worth
doing
it.
a good job somewhere along the line, right?
Yeah.
I love that. So I think that parents today, they get caught up in definitely their kids not having consequences. I can't tell you how many parents I know that their child gets in trouble in school and they run to their rescue. They get in trouble with the law. They bail them
And I will
out.
say, if a parent acts like that, it is the ultimate form of ego. It is all about you, and you are being absolutely selfish. If you are the one that pays the consequences for your kids' choices completely. Now, I'm not saying, you're not there to help them and dust them off and pat their butt and get them up and moving. But if you're the one that steps in and takes all the consequences and you're the one that deals with it, you're ruining your kids. You're being a selfish, ego-driven person by parenting that way, period. It's absolutely, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're making it about you and you being the hero than it is about actually caring about the growth and potential of your children.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Definitely. And I think that we live in a whole society of that today where kids are not experiencing the consequences of their actions.
Everybody gets a trophy. I
Yep.
hate,
Everybody gets a
absolutely
trophy.
abhor that. Yep.
And everybody gets bailed out and you can do no wrong in your parents' eyes. And it's unbelievable to me because what type of generation are we raising for later? And it's kids who don't understand that there are choices that you have to make in life and that there are consequences
Yep.
to our actions. And the consequence may not happen immediately. It could come 2 years later. It doesn't matter. It's still there. And it's always going to hang over you. The other part about that is too, your choices can also create regrets in your life.
Yep. And this,
And that
when
can keep going.
when you go through a divorce, when you go through a major life trauma, breakup, whatever you want to call it, your kids will feel it, obviously, because it's part of them having to shift their idea of how things should be, and finally accepting reality that you don't always get what you want and life does not always feel good. Instead of looking at it from an ego point of view where you feel guilty for having made whatever bad decision you made or for whatever happened that's ending the marriage, you have to almost start looking at it like it's an opportunity. This is an opportunity to sit down with the kids and work through this and help them not take it on as their own responsibility, except to take their own responsibility for themselves.
Right.
If you feel guilty about it, and I'll be real, I felt guilty. I did. But you have to stop and go, why? Why am I feeling guilty? What's going to be the best decision for the family, here in the long run? And that's not always easy to make when you're in the middle of something that's hugely emotional and people are feeling hurt and wanting to really kind of lash back out. But
we need to talk about that a little bit. So there is rules of play when you're divorced with children. And one of those big rules that should be in play is don't bash their other parent.
ooh,
You should never bash the other parent to your children.
I know a lot of parents, and this is so unhealthy, that use their kids as tools to try and hurt the other one.
Absolutely.
Again, we'll talk about narcissism on another episode, but narcissists are huge like this. When they stop being able to punish and abuse their victim, they look for the flying monkeys, which is usually friends, family, and especially children, to try and hurt the other one. And they can be very, very, very effective at it. But if you do that, again, that is one of the most ultimate forms of ego and even abuse of the kids.
Absolutely. And the other thing too with that is, do not use your children to communicate with your ex.
No.
Your communication should be between you and them. Okay. The children should not be relaying messages.
Well, and I agree with you on that. And especially if I'm hearing you the way you're with what you're trying to say with that. I do know of some pretty unhealthy breakups where the spouses should really not be communicating.
Right.
And it also depends on the
There's
age.
email.
Yes, there's email, and it also depends on the age of the children. Because I have some people that they just they can't talk to their ex whatsoever. Now, depends on the communication though. If it's like arranging visitation and whatnot, I don't know. That might be something you can work through the kids with. But
I don't think it should be with the kids. You know, my boyfriend, his kids are 12 and 15. And he tries very hard to communicate with their mom whenever, you know, there's a schedule shift or who's picking them up, who's taking them home. You know, he tries to communicate with her. And that's really how it should be, because what we found is, especially the 12-year-old gets really, really stressed out if he receives a message from his mom to ask his dad something. He starts to get like really, really stressed out. She doesn't mean it that way. It's not vindictive on her side at all. She's just, you know, just communicating through the son. But reality is it shouldn't be done. It should be between parent and parent, whether it's text, whether it's an email, however you communicate best and effectively and not fighting.
So if you have an ex, because I know we're going to have people that are going to be like, well, wait a minute, my situation's different. If you have an ex that every single type of communication you have with them is all about trying to hurt you, how do you effectively co-parent with that?
Okay, so that's interesting, because my daughters, their father, had a very difficult time communicating with me and would say horrible things and, you know, wanted to get into a fight with me and whatever the case may be. And I probably was that way with him to a degree at first, but I realized very early on in going through a parenting, you know, a divorce parenting class that, you know, you can't do that. And we had to find a way to just say, you know, just to text and just be like, okay, I'm not getting into any of this with you. I'm not responding to any of that. I am talking about the children. They're on their way over, because we bought a home 10 doors down from each other, which was not smart.
I don't know if I could do that.
Well, we did it so that the kids, their school would be the same, the bus would be the same, like everything would be the same with the kids, and they could just walk between the houses, right? It didn't turn out that way. It did not. Thought I was being smart. It did not turn out that way. It's okay. Actually, it turned out that my oldest stopped going over there at 8 years old. I had counselors involved to try to help them learn how to communicate better, not for me and the kids, but for him and the kids, because I wanted them to have their father in their life. I felt like it was really important. I get very angry at moms out there that try to keep their kids from their fathers.
Yes.
I think it's wrong. I think that it doesn't matter what issues you have with your ex, whether it's male or female, that is not the issue of the children. It's not their fault. Therefore, they should never feel like they're in the middle. And I feel like, you know, parents that do that and keep their kids from the other spouse, the ex is a form of abuse in and of itself, and it's preventing rightful parents to be parents of their children.
Yep.
And I don't agree with that. So I personally paid for the counselor for him to go with my children to try to have an honest, real relationship with the kids. It didn't go well with my oldest. It did with my youngest for a long time, but sadly today he does not speak to either of them. And that's very sad to me. They deserve to know their father. So
I might argue with that too. I might argue with that statement.
Good, bad, or indifferent, it's their father.
Yeah, but
they need to formulate who they believe he is on their own and not from influence from me.
I totally agree with that. I don't believe in owing loyalty because of blood, period.
Right.
Abuse is abuse. Unhealthy is unhealthy, regardless of whether they're blood or not. And I've actually had to remove my maternal mother out of my life completely
Wow.
because it was one horrible, painful experience after another. And I haven't spoken to her in gotta be at least 12 years now. And I won't.
Right.
I just absolutely won't. There was enough chances given there. But again, that wasn't anything my dad even gave me. It was something that I had to figure out for myself as an adult and
Right.
make the decision on. But
and that's what I wanted for my daughters. Exactly that. I wanted them to know who he was so that they could make a choice for themselves, not influenced by me, of whether they wanted to have a relationship with him or not. Now, ironically, both of them would like to have a relationship with their father and have tried.
Okay.
And he just doesn't respond. Sadly. It makes my heart hurt. It really does. I think there's guilt feelings with me on the divorced parent side with that too, because I'm like, he's the parent that I chose to have children with. And I wish
but you're not responsible for him.
No, I'm not. It just makes me sad for them. You know, I wish it was different for them.
I get it. I get
Yeah.
it.
You know, but I never wanted to be the cause of them not having a relationship with him.
Sure.
I'm hoping that I didn't do anything that caused that. But I mean, their perception and what happened, I don't know. You know, they've never talked to me about that. But parents should not badmouth the other person. They shouldn't use their kids to communicate with the other parent unless there's no other way. Now, you're right. When the kids get a little older, it does get easier, you know, like if they're teenagers.
So this is really interesting because I'm going to say I'm absolutely not an expert in this area. That I have questions I'm still working through, and I think we can't generalize any of this because every breakup, every relationship is different between a husband and a wife and whatnot. The question is, what do you do? Because you don't want to badmouth your ex, but what do you do when your ex spends all of their time trying to make everyone choose sides and trying to trash you to the kids? Do you A, remain quiet and tell your kids, I love you, you've got to grow up and make your own decisions on this? Or do you B, counteract it with the things that you know to be true?
I think it depends on how old your children are.
Yeah, like I said, every situation is different, but
right. I really think that it depends on how old your children are and how mature they are. So in the beginning, I was the one being badmouthed and bashed to my children 100%. 100%. And I chose to be the bigger person and not do the same. And I would just tell them when they were little, like, you know, I'm really sorry that daddy is so hurt about this. And that's really where this is coming from, is hurt. And all you can do is just love daddy and always remember that mommy loves you with all of me. That's all you can do. And then when they got older and they started asking me questions and I felt like they were mature enough to handle the answers, I'm like, okay, do you want me to sugarcoat this for you, or do you want me to tell you the reality of what really occurred?
Right.
And I gave them a choice and just had a normal communicative conversation with them where they were allowed to ask whatever they wanted to ask, and I was an open book for them. I owned my part. It's part of that not being a victim. I owned my part in the relationship. I owned my errors, my mistakes, and even admitted to them that I wish I would have left differently. I still would have left, but I would have left differently. I made some mistakes in all of that, and it was hurtful to them.
Sure.
So I think that because I was able to own my part and answer them honestly and without bias, and this is what occurred, and this really hurt your father, this really hurt me, and I'm sorry that those things occurred, but what questions do you have? What do you remember? What perception do you have in your mind of what happened? Like, let's talk about it. So, what are your thoughts? You have thoughts going on in your head all over the place right now.
Oh, Again, there's so many things I would do differently about my divorce. There's just so many things.
I would have gotten divorced sooner.
I had never, yeah, well, and that's a whole nother episode right there. But
Mhm.
we would have been divorced sooner, but we had a pretty traumatic life event happen that kind of we had to work through. Um,
Mhm.
well, I should say I had to work with. Um, she just kind of disappeared and had her own life. It
Sure.
was very traumatic for all of us. Um, but we didn't work on our marriage. We didn't even work on each other for a good 8, 9 years. And
Wow.
honestly, by the time the rest of the family and our kids had healed enough that we could even start talking to each other, there was no saving it whatsoever. Maybe if we had been able to work on it earlier, it might have been able to work through, but by that time it was just too far gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of hurt and a lot of anger that came from her side, especially. But I watched a lot of growth happen for the both of us. And one of the things that I've tried to do right as a parent, and again, I will never claim that I was flawless as a parent, but one
Yeah.
of the things I tried to do right as a parent is letting my kids know that I make mistakes
Mhm.
and apologizing for them and then asking them to not take them on as their own. I found myself using the same harsh voice that had been used on me and that I had used on myself on my kids, especially when I was absolute stress to the max and I would just lose it. I would say those things that were hurtful to me when I was a kid. But the difference is I would go back to my kids and I would say, hey, I love you. I want you to know that what I said, I didn't mean. What I said came from a place within me that's still damaged and hurt. And it was how I was treated. That's how I raised myself, even, or domesticated myself. And I want to ask you not to take it on. I don't really think that of you. I don't think you're an idiot. I don't think you're stupid at all. And I am sorry. I apologize for that. And I would try and work through them. In the end, though, it's still their responsibility if they want to take that on and keep it within themselves. All we can do is our best. And when we make mistakes, own them,
Mhm.
heal from them, grow from them, and move forward and be better because of them.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the best things we can teach our kids. So we're all going to make mistakes, especially in the middle of something as emotionally charged as a divorce. It sucks when one side owns it more than the other, because if
The
they could,
kids will figure it out.
they absolutely can.
They will
But
over
it
time.
kind of back to what we're talking about, though, kids won't really figure it out for their own if you take responsibility for their emotions and their hurt instead of
Right.
teaching them to be responsible for it, or teaching them to cover it up with fun, with pleasure, with things that are escapes.
Materialistic items, like anything, right? To try to
Yep.
give them escapes. So I think in wrapping up this episode today, I think one thing that we need to talk about is that later on in episodes, we're actually going to talk about dating with children. We're not going to tackle that today, but I mean, I definitely made some mistakes in that world. I will own them on that episode for sure, and things that I would do differently. Uh,
Sure.
and I think we all as parents feel that way because I mean we don't know what to do, and that'll be an interesting episode in and of
Not
it.
easy.
What?
I said, no, it's not easy. I do not envy parents that have to date with younger kids. I did it once when I was younger. Uh, Again, I don't know if there's pros and cons to having older kids or younger kids when you get divorced, but yeah, dating after divorce, especially when you have young ones at home, is just a completely different dynamic, and it's tough. You're gonna make mistakes, but you're gonna work through it.
Well, and I have, just a little teaser out there. I have an interesting episode. When I met my boyfriend, I still had my stepson from my previous marriage living with me. He's older. He was 20. What was he? 20. Well, we celebrated his 21st birthday with him. And he was still living with me. So, I mean, that was an interesting dynamic. I actually had one man tell me, he's like, nobody can ever date you because you have your ex-husband's son still with you. And I'm like, what would be the difference if I
Yeah,
adopted him?
That dude's got issues. Whoever told you that.
Right. I was like, get out of my truck.
Good.
You will never talk about my stepson again. Get out of my truck. You're done. I made him walk home because I was so offended by that. Right. But, so between my boyfriend and I, we have 6. If you count my stepson, he's got 3 children, one of which is an young adult. And I have my 2 daughters and my stepson that are all 21, 22, and 23. And the dynamics are different across the board. I mean, we've got 12 and 15, and then we've got all early 20s, and it's still never a dull moment. It's just not. It's never going to be a dull moment when you have so many kids, young or older, in your life. So, all right, I just want to recap. So let's recap the rules of play with divorce really quick. And that is, try not to use your kids for communication. Let's say try, because I know there's extenuating circumstances, as you so brought out. Try not to use your kids to communicate with your ex. Don't bash your ex. Don't keep your children from your ex. It's not fair to your children, especially, but it's not fair to them either. And also, one of the biggest thing is always teach your kids how to grow up in the real world today. Don't be the Disneyland parent who's just about fun. Actually teach your kids responsibility and how to be a contribution as adults. And that's our real role as parents. That doesn't stop because you get divorced.
Yep.
So I hope this helps all of you today. Eddie, would you like to add to that at all?
No, I think you hit it on the head. The one thing I might just throw in there is that, again, every relationship's different. The end of every relationship is different. The dynamics between you and your ex is different. The dynamics between your kids and your ex and yourself are different. There's always circumstances. We try and generalize, we try and talk about, but there's always circumstances where you have to make the best decision for you, for your children, but especially for your own health and what it's going to be like moving forward. Anytime you use your kids, you're in the wrong.
Yep.
But there are circumstances where they shouldn't see your ex, even if they're too young to understand it. Absolutely know that that's a reality. We would love to hear feedback, though, for everyone that's out there listening. This is definitely a charged episode. There's a lot more to it. We could spend hours discussing this, but if you guys have any feedback in any of the episodes, message us questions, message us your ideas. We'll be happy to read through them and maybe even put them on the podcast and talk about them.
Definitely. We would love to hear from all of you. So Eddie, how do they contact you? How do they find you?
Find me on Instagram at Edified Living, and find me at Eddie Cunningham on Facebook.
All right. And you can reach me at tinavaliant.com. You can also email me directly at tina@tinavaliant.com with any questions that you would like us to answer on this podcast. And women, don't be afraid. Eddie's here because he wants to answer what questions you might have on why a man does this or why he thinks that. And, he'll answer those as best he can, understanding that everything is individual, right? And just as much, if you have questions about why women do the things they do or what the psychology behind us is, I'll try to answer them as best I can. So we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think we can both agree this is a really fun project for both of us.
I'm enjoying it. Appreciate being a part of it, Tina.
All right. See ya, everybody.